really quickly. Great, so we should be recording. So a quick introduction about Pat Connor. So Pat Connor is a senior policy and practice consultant for CASEL, which is the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. She provides assistance and support to states on social emotional learning that are involved in the Collaborative States Initiative. Pat was an educator for over 36 years, and she believes that all students and adults thrive in a safe, just, and supportive school climate, and that families, caregivers, communities are critical partners in building equitable systems that support student success. So thank you so much, Pat, for your continued work and help with Maple Run School District, and I'll turn it over to you.
Oh, great. Thank you, Alexis, and good evening, everyone. I'm so happy to be able to join you today. And you probably can tell from my accent that I am not from Vermont. I am coming to you from Nashville, Tennessee, where I live and where I have worked, again, in education for over 37 years now. So I'm going to start off by sharing my screen with you guys tonight. And what I want to make certain that we do today is we want to make this a conversation around what social and emotional learning is and what that means for Maple Run districts. And I'm going to get us set up here. And so we'll also be hearing from Alexis tonight as well about the work that they are doing in Maple Run. So these are some of our guiding questions that we're going to talk about tonight. And number one is, what exactly is social emotional learning? It may be a new phrase for many of you, but it's also a phrase that a lot of people aren't quite sure what it is. And why does that matter? Why is social emotional learning important, and why does it matter in a child's life and in our lives as adults? And how can Maple Run promote SEL for all students? And we're going to talk about that. So before we begin, I'd like to ask you this question, and if you feel comfortable, ask you to take your microphones off mute, and we'll have a discussion about this. So when you think about St. Albans and Maple Run and your community as a whole, what are your hopes and your dreams for your child and or the children that you have? You may have more than one child in Maple Run District. So what are your hopes and dreams for your child or children in this community? So who would like to talk about that?
Hi, I'll go first.
Hey, James, nice to meet you. Nice to see your face.
Nice to meet you too, Pat. So this is my daughter, Adelaide. I think she's on camera right now. I can't really tell.
Yes, how cute.
So I guess my hopes and dreams for Adelaide and the other children in the community is to have a developmentally healthy school place, right? A school community that supports their development, that supports not only their academic achievement, but also their ability to interact with others in a healthy way, to regulate themselves, to be able to name their emotions, to be able to name the emotions of others as they're happening, and to really be able to understand, you know, the community, the neighborhood, understand how they can navigate throughout that in a healthy way.
Yeah, absolutely. Great, James. Anyone else like to share?
So I'll kind of jump in and I'll piggyback kind of on what James has said. I think some great points there. Certainly the hope and goal that I have for my own children is that their experience at school kind of hits on all of the things that James had mentioned. But even kind of above and beyond that we're kind of building a system that supports kids to develop well beyond high school or well beyond kind of their schooling time. And so the interactions in their community, in the workplace, and that it's just kind of part of the culture that we're creating in our school district, so that we're really focusing not just solely on kind of the academic content areas, but really kind of developing the whole child and making sure that all of those kind of innate skills are something that we're focused on.
Absolutely. And great, Steve, because you talked about the whole child, the physical, emotional, mental health and the behavioral health of all students. Yeah, good deal. Okay, well, thank you for sharing. That was awesome. So let's look at what's possible with social emotional learning. And so I'm going to show you, I'm approaching this tonight as if it's a blank slate. You have no significant knowledge around social emotional learning. So we're going to see a little video about what's possible with SEL, especially as it relates to schools.
School should be where everyone feels comfortable and everyone should know that everyone's unique and you don't have to be perfect.
SEL is really about the holistic development of young people.
Social emotional learning to me provides students with purpose. SEL was a great foundation and catalyst for me. It taught me to value education and value human connection.
Social and emotional learning is the process by which children grow and develop their emotional lives and their relationships.
Well, social and emotional learning gives the space where people can actually look at students as more than just numbers on a standardized test. We give people the space to explore who they are as people, to look at their identity, to recognize how important relationships are and what it means to be a successful human, not just a successful student.
In my classroom, they are able to share the things that are personal to them. They're able to celebrate one another's differences. They're inclusive of each other despite what race, socioeconomic, or gender they're from.
SEL promotes academic achievement in effective ways, raising test scores 11 percentile points. It reduces anxiety and distress as well. So it improves pro-social behavior and how kids get along and attend in the classroom.
SEL is rocket fuel. It is the thing that can actually accelerate the advancement of our society.
When I think about a healthy environment for my daughter, I'm looking at, are those teachers engaged? Are they showing her to be an empathetic person? When teachers are engaged and they have that engagement with the students are going to excel.
The educators, the families, the community members, and the students agree that this is important.
How do we make sure that kids don't just get a segment of their life where social and emotional learning is important, but they're getting that in all parts of their life?
Right now, we have an untapped pool of talent. And so the idea is to leverage SEL in order to help young people realize those talents and thereby help the broader society and, in fact, the world.
We really can create schools that inspire, that help students find their sense of self, that help students find their sense of purpose, to learn how to relate to one another, and to better prepare kids for wherever they choose to go in life.
Well, SEL taught you to step up when you need to, but also step back when you had to. So you were creating space for yourself, but also making space for others.
Now we open a new chapter, and the new chapter is inviting educators, families, young people, scholars, policymakers, inviting the whole country into the dialogue about the kind of social and emotional development we want to promote for all of our children in the future.
Okay, some of the key things that really resonated with me, and every time I hear this video, I think again about what you said, Steve. It's a holistic approach, and social emotional learning skills don't stop at the school door. They're in the community, they're in the workplace. They go with you for the remainder of your life and your life as a human being. So I think that that is extremely important to recognize that, and to recognize the value of what social emotional learning skills are. So it's important, especially in the school setting. All learning is social. All learning is emotional. We know, and if we reflect back on our own school experience, we had a teacher that we loved. we would do anything for that teacher. The teacher that bonded with students, that had great relationships. We wanted to learn from them. They were excited about learning. And so what I do know is I learn best when I have good relationships with those who are my teachers. And that's the way it is in school as well. So all learning is social and all learning is emotional. That's a really key point. And some of the stats that we talk about is this, what research has shown us, decades of research about social emotional learning. And it's that you will improve students, not only their skills and their attitudes, but their academic performance. And again, 11th percentile increase in standardized performance on standardized tests. That's huge. There's a decline in students' anxiety, negative behaviors, classroom issues, and substance use. Social emotional learning skills are assets. It's asset-based model, and these are protective factors that help to keep our kids safe and buffer those negative things that influence their lives. What we do know also is it's really a wise financial investment. For every dollar you spend on a social emotional learning program, there's an $11 return on investment. And what business does not want to see that? That's huge. So what exactly is, excuse me, social emotional learning? So I'm going to give you an abbreviated definition, and I'm not going to read this to you because you can read this. But what I'm going to tell you is kind of a short version. And for me, social emotional learning is a process, a lifelong process. It starts at birth and it goes from cradle to the grave. So it's a process through which all young people and adults acquire and apply that knowledge and attitude to develop healthy identities and emotions and achieve personal goals and to really show empathy for others. So it's those skills that I want to see developed in my child, because these lead to success in academics, success in life, success in your careers. These are the skills that employers want in their employees. It's the number one thing employers tell us across the nation. We want kids with great social emotional learning skills. And above all, SEL really promotes educational equity because it's good for all kids. And I'm going to talk more about that in just a moment. So exactly what are social emotional learning skills? Well, CASEL is the leading authority and has developed the 5 core competencies of the SEL skills. And they're in 5 buckets. They're self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. And as you can see on the right is our famous, what we call the CASEL wheel, because these skills are nestled in the center of this wheel. These skills cannot live in a vacuum in and of themselves. They have to be supported in classrooms and developed in schools by families and caregivers and the community as a whole. So these are nestled within the larger circles, and they're concentric circles. So you'll see, and we'll talk about how you can promote these within these different settings too. So let me just tell you a bit about self-awareness. That's the ability to understand your emotions, your thoughts, and your values, and how they really influence your behavior. For those of you who might have some background in counseling, we say your thoughts cause your feelings, cause your behaviors. And so when you're aware of what your emotions are and be able to identify those, you're going to be able to link your feelings and your values and your thoughts together. So these are some of the look-fors and some of the skills that children can develop from being taught about self-awareness and what it looks like. The next one that I want to elevate is self-management. So if you ever run across anyone in maybe a retail store, grocery store, or in the car as you're driving, who does not do well when, as far as managing their emotions. Here in Tennessee, unfortunately, we have a lot of incidents of road rage. And again, that ability to manage your emotions, not go off on the teacher, not go off on your parents, not go off on your employers, to be able to manage those emotions and to utilize stress management strategies and try to develop and exhibit some self-discipline are hugely important. To me, we can't achieve much in our lives if we're not able to manage our emotions in a productive way. Another core competency is social awareness, the ability to understand the perspectives of others and to empathize with those. And that includes people from all backgrounds, all cultures, all contexts. So being able to agree sometimes, to disagree, but in a healthy way, to understand where people are coming from, to recognize their strengths, to really demonstrate empathy and compassion, to show concern for the feelings of others, and being able to express gratitude. So this is what social awareness is. And then my favorite are relationship skills. When I ask educators, what is the one core competence of the 5 that you really use and utilize during your school day? And they say relationship skills. Education is about relationships. It's the ability to establish and maintain healthy and supportive relationships, and really to be able to effectively navigate those settings with a lot of diverse individuals and groups. So knowing how to communicate effectively, knowing how to develop positive relationships. When you look again at employers, that's what they want. They want kids and adults who can communicate, who can work well in teams, who really take the perspective of others, who can resist that negative social peer pressure and can show leadership in groups. Those are skills that will serve you well through your entire life. And then last, but certainly not least, is responsible decision-making. The ability to make caring and constructive choices about your personal behavior, about your social interactions across multiple situations, and being able to demonstrate curiosity, open-mindedness, that growth mindset, and being able to identify solutions. When I first started out in education in my school district, I started out as a life skills teacher. And basically what I worked with students a lot on was learning how to say no, using those skills to resist negative peer pressure once you've made that decision, and to really think more about and recognize your critical thinking skills and how you can use those appropriately in multiple settings. So that's a lot of information, I know. So before I move on with that, I'm just going to pause a moment to ask if anyone has any questions or comments about the 5 core competencies, about what they are, their definition, and really what the definition of social emotional learning is. If not, we're going to transition to a polling question. So Alexis has got a question, a polling question she's going to put up for us. So now you know everything there is to know about social emotional learning, and that's tongue in cheek as I say that, and the 5 core competencies. So which one of those 5 core competencies do you feel is most important for your child's healthy growth and development? I know there's 5, but if you could choose one of the 5 core competencies, which one would it be? And we're going to list those again in the polling question.
Can you see the poll? Did that?
Yes.
Oh, okay, perfect.
Yeah, so if you'll take a moment to select which one of those that you think is most important. Okay, I think we've got a dead heat here. So I'm going to end the poll and I'm going to share the results. So we have one for the top three, self-management, self-awareness, and responsible decision-making, all got a vote. So it's just shows how hard it is to just choose one of the core competencies, because in all honesty, what I want for my child is all five, because you can see the benefit of all five in your child's life. So how do we do that? So how do we go about really integrating social emotional learning, and where? So I talked about social emotional learning nestles within these concentric circles. So that's our framework. And so you'll see it's classrooms, schools, families, and caregivers and community. And in classrooms, what we see is a real supportive classroom environment. What we do know, research has shown that social emotional learning skills contribute in a positive way to school climate. When you integrate SEL in instruction, it strengthens that instruction. And when you do explicit SEL instruction through a curriculum, that also elevates social emotional learning as a priority for that school. Another area where we want to see it is in the school in general. So there are a lot of school-wide practices and structures that promote SEL. And so we're going to talk about later some of those that you're seeing at Maple Run, and Alexis is going to give you an update on where their work is within Maple Run. But what I do want to say again is that supportive school climate and looking at your discipline policies. How do they promote social emotional learning? How do you listen to student voice? Because students, I was raised in a time, and some of you may have been, where we had no voice in our education. You just sat in the chair, you got all this rote memorization, you weren't able to say what you liked and didn't like necessarily. But so that's not the way education is now, thankfully. We want to be able to elevate student voice and listen to what they say to improve our practices and our structures. The other is your role as in the family, and that is to reinforce or to teach these skills to your student. You know, I must say in Tennessee, when I was with the Department of Education here, there was a lot of resistance to social emotional learning because families thought, oh, that's something families should do and only families. And I agree, families should do that. However, what I want to see is, again, these concentric circles. What I want to know is my child is getting those same messages about social emotional learning, not only from the family, but in the community, and especially in the school and the classroom. I would like to have those reinforced in those settings. So that's very important. And then the last is the community. So do you have community partners? Maple Run works with several community partners, nonprofits that really echo or should echo those SEL skills within all of their programming, because social emotional learning is the plate upon which all initiatives, all lessons, everything should be built, programs around that plate. So when we look at parents, why do parents feel social and emotional learning is important? So I want to show you a quick 2-minute testimonial from a group of parents about why they feel SEL is important.
I am a big advocate for SEL. When I think about a healthy environment for my daughter, I'm looking at, are those teachers engaged? Are they showing her to be an empathetic person? When teachers are engaged and they have that engagement with the students are going to excel.
Learn the skills necessary. One has to have both a healthy internal life and external life. And so being self-aware of that is really critical.
teach them how to deal with emotion.
How to interact with other kids, how to play, how to cooperate, how to do things together, also have fun. Starting to understand that why do one thing instead of another and how it affects other people. Explaining to him his actions have influence on his quality of life.
We are their number one role model. Between modeling and direct engagement in their education and direct engagement with the school and the teachers and participating, the parent's the number one educator from day one.
Okay, I like that last statement. There is no greater teacher than you as a parent. You're the first and most important teacher a child has. So when you talk about why you should value social emotional learning, just from looking so far what we've talked about, how do you feel as a parent about the importance of social emotional learning in your child's life? And why would you want to see that encouraged, hopefully, in the school setting and in the community setting? So what do you see as important about what we've talked about so far?
Yeah, so I'll weigh in there a little bit, Pat. I mean, I think to kind of everything that you've touched on and talked about already, for me, I think the reason that SEL, to me, SEL, I think is almost more important than some of the academic content skills that we tend to focus on, because it really speaks to who our kids are and who the students are as people. And kind of, what we talked about is these are lifelong skills, and these are the things that are going to be carrying with them no matter what their profession. So I guess I'm less focused on, does my child know an algebraic equation? And I'm more concerned with, is my child empathetic, right? And so I think that schools play a pretty significant role in helping kind of foster that socialization and helping to kind of impact the kids in the development of those skills in a way that, obviously families have a piece and a role to that as well. But I think sometimes the schools can be a pretty strong vehicle for some of that work.
Yeah, I agree. Well put, Steve. James, I think you had your microphone unmuted. Did you want to add anything to what Steve said?
Yeah, so sorry, we're in a little bit of the middle of dinner time here, but but yeah, so I think that one of the biggest things about SEL, one of the most important aspects of it, is that public schools are one of the only places that we have a true plurality, right? That the community really comes together from every walk of life, from every neighborhood in the city goes to school together, right? And so SEL really helps to develop community and the ability for different aspects of the community to communicate with one another. It allows for that difference of opinion to occur in a healthy way, so that communities aren't, driven apart or ripped apart by, partisanship or opposing opinions.
Yeah, I love that, James. And I think social emotional learning, when it's practiced and evident in any context, really allows some serious topics or conversations around cultures and diversity, and we're not all the same, and how are we different, and being able to come to an understanding and a valuing of our differences instead of it turning the other way. I think that's so important, in my opinion, especially in the country today, is that we value and appreciate where everyone is coming from, because we are not coming from the same space. And you're right, the school, I always said the school is the hub of the community, and it reflects the community. So I think that's so important.
I just wanted to emphasize something that you said when you reviewed the slide on classrooms and how social emotional learning can be embedded in the classroom, and something we're continuing to try to do here at Maple Run is really shift the narrative and shift the mindset that social emotional learning is an add-on or it's something that happens outside of academic time or outside of instruction, and really trying to build that perception that it can be embedded into the classroom routine and into the classroom instruction. And it's not something that is in addition to or should be viewed as separate from. So I really liked that slide, and that's a big part of the work that we're trying to do here at the district as well.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Alexis. We know the plate of teachers is full, especially during this time of COVID and in general. And so what we have to convince teachers is that this isn't an add-on. This is not an additional thing or task that they have to do every day. They're already doing it. But to elevate their practices that they're doing and doing well, and share those with other fellow teachers throughout the district. So yeah, we're not adding on, we're just being very intentional and elevating SEL as a priority within Maple Run. So good point, thank you. So what does it look like school-wide? It has to be in your classrooms. It's got to be in staff convenings. It has to be in family and community relations. And I applaud Maple Run for having this meeting tonight to talk about social emotional learning, how it is reflected in families and in the community. And also we have to look at all our school practices and policies. It's systemic. In other words, it needs to be embedded through all systems that you have within a school in a district. So this can be a challenge sometimes, but it's things that we're already doing. We're just elevating and calling attention to that. So there are 10 indicators from CASEL around school-wide SEL, and one of those, again, we've already talked about, is you can have a program of SEL program. I think Maple Run does Second Step. Is that correct, Alexis?
Some of our schools do. We are not quite aligned pre-K-12 yet. That's part of the journey that we're on right now.
Right. And so but that's a curriculum that you do utilize, and your goal is to get that throughout all your schools, and to integrate the SEL with academic instruction. What does it look like in a math class? What does it look like in a social studies class or a science class? To really know what SEL, and I think when you look at those core competencies, you will be able to see immediately how social emotional learning can be integrated and is embedded within academic instruction. Youth voice and engagement. I can't say this enough. Youth want to be heard. They want to have a voice in how their schools are run. And we as adults need to provide that opportunity and that setting and be willing to listen to them. Supportive class in school and classroom climates, a focus on adult SEL. For many years, we just focused on students. It's all about the students. But what we know now, and especially with the work that many districts are doing around trauma, is we need to focus on adults first, then our students. So it's really important for the school district to focus on their adult social emotional learning skills and to strengthen those. Supportive discipline, and we're going to talk about an initiative that you have in Maple Run. A continuum of integrated supports. So what supports do we have in place in our school to help students? And there is something called a multi-tiered system of support, and that tier 1 is what we call the first tier, and that's universal. It's good for all kids. Social emotional learning is a tier 1 practice and should be foundational and the foundation of your multi-tiered system of support. So that's all education jargon, and I apologize. Authentic family partnerships are important, as well as community partnerships. And you really have to look at what you're doing well, what needs to be improved, and how you go about improving. So it's that cycle of continuously improving. And that's what education does all the time. It's never stagnant. We're always learning. And what I love about SEL, it is a lever for equity. It's good for all students. It's good for all schools. It's a strategy for systemic improvement. It's not just an intervention for at-risk students. It should not be used solely as an intervention for at-risk students. It's a way to lift student voice and promote student agency. There is, everybody's born with a unique potential. What we want to do in schools is help kids realize what their unique potential is. It should support adults. It should support teachers in doing their work. And you must engage students, families, and communities as really authentic partners within this work. So that's really important. And it's important to recognize this is a process. It does not happen overnight. It's that unifying thread that's woven into all students' educational experiences. It helps to bring Maple Run's district priorities together. It's not just a single lesson or an activity the school counselor does. It's embedded within all systems in a school. And it takes time, as I said, it's a process. With fidelity, that systemic implementation takes about 3 to 5 years. So it's a process that Maple Run is currently in their first year. And that's what they're doing, is beginning that process. So I'm going to turn it over to Alexis for her to talk about what they're doing in Maple Run to begin this process.
Thank you, Pat. I just wanted to add to the last slide too. We often use the phrase social emotional learning isn't something that's added to the plate, it is the plate. And for some reason, staff and students and even parents really can kind of get that saying, that we're not trying to add another initiative to the district or to the workload of staff. This is the plate that everything should fall on top of and be interwoven into everything that we do. So just wanted to add that little, I always say it to myself, we're not adding it to the plate, it is the plate. So like Pat said, we are here at Maple Run, we are in year 1 of really diving in deep to the social emotional learning work from a systemic perspective. We are attempting to do a lot of alignment pre-K-12. So not only across grades, but across all of our schools, including our career and technical center. We have a group of very dedicated and passionate staff that meet monthly. And we started to meet monthly in July. That is navigating this work in a really complex year. So trying to do this on top of a global pandemic and COVID and the staffing crisis that we are in has been very difficult to say the least, but we have a lot of passionate and dedicated staff that are committed to continuing this work. So the first place that we started is we know that we needed not only an aligned definition of what social emotional learning is, which is what CASEL gives us, but we needed a process, and we needed a process that we could hold ourselves accountable to. I do want to give kind of recognition where recognition is due. This process has been modeled and adapted not only from other states that have already went through this work and are way ahead of us in their work, but we are also modeling it after our neighbors at Missisquoi Valley, who are a couple years ahead of us in doing this work as well. So it's been really great and really wonderful to have a school district right down the road that's ahead of us, and we can really learn from their strengths, but also the challenges that they faced in their first year and learn from that as well. So the process that we are adopting as Maple Run is the very first thing, again, was identifying what framework we wanted to use for social and emotional learning. That was a pretty easy one. CASEL is the most evidence-based, research-based, internationally recognized framework. So Maple Run has adopted that. We then did a lot of work around identifying grade bands and how we wanted to kind of separate that alignment. And that sounds like an easy task to complete. It's actually not. It takes a lot of research. It takes a lot of deep diving in terms of when you look developmentally at our students, how we want to separate those grade bands in terms of benchmark skills and learning goals. So what we decided on is pre-K to 3 to grade 3 is technically what is considered early childhood. So we are using that as one of our grade bands, and then we are going to tier the interventions and the skills throughout. 4 to 6 will be another grade band. Grade 7 to 9 will be a third grade band, and that was done intentionally in the sense of we wanted to combine grade 8 and grade 9 because we know that the transition from middle school to our high school is huge and is a very significant transition. And a lot of times when they get to BFA and they transition into 9th grade, the potential gaps in social emotional learning skills are really highlighted in a very different way that they haven't been before. So that is why we clumped middle school and 9th grade into one grade band, and then 10 to 12 is our final grade band. So that has been decided. The key overarching learning domains was also already done for us and was very easy once we adopted the CASEL framework. So we're using the CASEL 5 in terms of our overarching learning domains. And then we have started the process of really diving deep into sub goals for each of those 5 core competencies. So under every domain, so self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, and social awareness, each of those domains are going to have their own identified sub goals. I just gave one example here. So an example would be if we're looking at self-management for first graders, a sub goal example would be that they can demonstrate that they understand and use strategies for managing their emotions and their behaviors. So once we have those sub goals identified, then we can move on to the benchmark skills. And that is a very in-depth, complex, time-consuming process. It is not something that we want to rush through. We're trying to be very thoughtful and very mindful about what skills we are attaching to each of our goals in each of the domains. So currently, this is really where we are as a district. We're kind of floating back and forth between benchmark skills and sub goals. What we're finding is when we get into the weeds of the benchmark skills, we find ourselves going back to our sub goal work and reflecting on that and really asking ourselves, oh, did we miss something here? Or do we need to tighten up some language to be really clear about what we're trying to achieve? So again, using first grade in the same domain of self-management, an example of a benchmark skill would be that students can begin to identify and describe how emotions relate to thoughts and behaviors. And then once we have the skill that we want to teach and we want students to achieve, we're then looking at providing evidence-based strategies and activities that teachers and all staff can implement in real time. So we didn't just want to end with skills and then leave staff to their own devices. We really feel it's important to be giving them a toolbox full of really evidence and research-based tools that they can use on a daily basis with students. So again, in activity or a strategy for grade 1 could be increasing their feeling words vocabulary through books, role models, role plays, and modeling. And what we're going to do when we get to that point is really do hyperlinks. So we're not just going to leave it as use books or use role plays. We're going to give links to evidence and research-based books and resources that would help teach that benchmark skill for students in each of the grade bands. I do want to just emphasize and reinforce that throughout this whole process and throughout this work, even though we're early on, in addition to the support from Pat, we are working with a lot of local consultants and a lot of local specialists to ensure that our work is not only trauma informed, but it's based on restorative practices and that it's done through the lens of equity. So that's where we're really just making sure that we're looking at that whole child and they're able to meet the needs of all students. And then the final steps, once the staff group has done the nitty-gritty work, our work doesn't end there. So we have been very clear as a team and as a group of staff that we should not be the only voice at the table, and we should not be the only ones doing this work. So once we have a draft social emotional learning guide for Maple Run, there's going to be various opportunities and many opportunities to get feedback from various stakeholders. Parents in particular, student focus groups is going to be a huge one. And then our local community partners and our contracted service providers that we work with. So I really want to be transparent and be really clear in saying that when the district feels they are at a point to present a draft, it is truly a draft. There is no commitment to this is what we're going to do until we open it up for additional feedback and input from a variety of our stakeholders. Because again, this needs to be a community approach. We need to be elevating student voice and obtaining parent and caregiver feedback. So this step in particular to me is the most important one because we're only going to be effective if we have the buy-in and from the community and from our parents and our students. And it's going to take us a long time to get to this point. So again, I really appreciate Pat's slide on how systemic implementation takes multiple years, and it takes multiple years in a typical school year, not during a global pandemic. So it's going to take us some time to get to the point where we have anything to even present to our stakeholders, but we will get there and we are working on it. And then based on that feedback, obviously our work will be revised, probably not just once, probably multiple times before it's really solidified. And then our final step is once we roll it out for implementation in our classrooms and our schools, that we have a really solid plan for professional development and progress monitoring. So again, this is not a piece of paper or a stack of papers that we want or can just hand off to schools or to staff. They really need to be wrapped with support on tools and resources on how to do this effectively. And as a district, we need to have a solid plan on how to monitor, is it working? Are we being effective or not? And if the answer is we're not effective, what changes do we need to make and come back to the drawing board? So that was a lot of talking and a lot of information, but that is a really quick overview of where we currently are as Maple Run and where we are going down the road and in the future.
Thank you, Alexis. And let me ask if there's anyone that might have some questions for Alexis about the direction that Maple Run is embarking on to please ask those.
Yeah, hi Alexis. So James again. So thank you for this presentation, Pat and Alexis. I appreciate coming to this. And this final slide kind of answered where the district is intending to go, and I appreciate that. Would it be correct in saying that you, Alexis, are sort of the point person for how this process is moving forward?
That would be correct, yes.
Okay, awesome, great. Because I definitely want to be keyed into, knowing how progress monitoring is going to develop. I myself, I'm an education data analyst. I work primarily in school improvement data. I've worked with different schools implementing SEL over the years. And as a member of the St. Albans community and the Maple Run community, I am heavily invested in this work. So I will probably be reaching out to you shortly just to touch base and open lines of communication, since I am familiar with this work.
Absolutely. I appreciate you sharing that. And I think, like I said before, we cannot do this work alone, and we don't want to do it alone. So we definitely appreciate the involvement and commitment from our parents and our community. And again, I do just want to be really transparent that we're moving very slowly. And we're intentionally moving very slowly. So I am always open, to meeting and to touching base and connecting. I just might not have all the answers quite yet.
Of course, you know what? It's better to not have the answers, because this process it's messy, right, Pat?
Yes, but we're trying to make it easy.
Right.
Yeah. So thank you, James. That's a great question. So I don't want to keep everyone. It's 5:58, and I'm very cognizant of your time and how valuable it is, especially in the evening with your children. So I'd like for us, if there are no other questions or comments, if you have those, please take yourself off mute and ask. And if not, I want to ask this closing question, and I want to first thank Alexis for inviting me here tonight, and want to thank you guys for participating in this. So has anything we've said this evening deepened your understanding, changed your understanding, or really developed your understanding of social emotional learning? And if you just want to verbally say that, I think that'd be great.
What I will say, and obviously having worked with you, Pat, for a little while now, and appreciate kind of the insight that you're providing here tonight. What I think for me is great to hear, and kind of the message and my takeaway is that it's just great to see that our district is prioritizing this work, right? And obviously I have a vested interest in my own children being students in the district, but just it's just wonderful to see that Maple Run is making a commitment to this work and is really investing the time and effort and financial resources to do this. So I'm just really appreciative for that, and Alexis for your leadership in this process, and appreciate the shout out earlier too as well. Thanks.
Okay, well, Alexa, do you have anything in closing that you'd like to say? If not, we'll call it a night.
I don't. Again, I just not only want to thank you, Pat, for your continued support, because James is right on. The work is messy and it's hard. And sometimes that's how we learn the most, right? When we really mess up and we make some really yucky calls, and then we have to go back and say, ooh, that really wasn't the right thing to do or the right direction to go. And Pat, you've been really great around trying to steer us in the right way, along with Missisquoi Valley School District as well. So I just really appreciate the support and the collaboration and the teaming, because it's not a one-woman show, and it's not just a staffing show. So I just appreciate the inclusion of the work.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, Alexis, thank you. And I just want to wish everyone a warm evening. If it's going 30 below tomorrow, please make sure you've got several layers on. So take care and thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.